All right, it's your brother Sare back with another one. Um, y'all like what y'all been hearing? These little pieces we've been doing. Um, like and subscribe. We're gonna go in one again on the ancient world. Y'all see the title of the video. Um, what deity are ancient Ethiopians named after? All right. So, and I know that might come across as a weird question, and the relevance of the question when we even get into the idea, and we talking about the ancient world. Whenever we get into the idea of Ethiopians in the ancient world, I'm not necessarily talking about the present day occupants of the countries of Ethiopia and Eritrea. I'm not necessarily talking about them. When I'm talking about Ethiopians in the ancient world, Ethiopian was the name of the race of black people. So that's why when you get into ancient literature, that's a racial distinction or what have you. So that's why when we do a deep dive into what are Ethiopians and we get into all this information about Ethiopia, it's not necessarily a thing about the country. It's more of a thing about the history of a group of people. So that's what we're kind of getting into. Now, I just want to kind of draw a little context. When we say Ethiopian, let's kind of get into this, what we mean. And again, we're talking about Ethiopians in the ancient world, right? I normally have, I still got a little bibliography on this. The books I'm gonna really go into, I'm gonna go get back into that Ophiliotra, and I'm gonna get into that Celestial Ship of the North, kind of go into some of that. Um, But right now, just on the light stuff, the little cracks and crevices. Okay, I went to the Google AI, right? So let's get a little context in this thing. Okay, so Ethiopia. It's often termed that we often divide Ethiopia in ancient times as Eastern Ethiopia and Western Ethiopia. Typically, we view Western Ethiopia as Africa, and we view Eastern Ethiopia as India, respectively. All right, so let's get into that. So this is the Google AI. So we just go. This is the light stuff. Okay, it says in ancient times, Eastern Ethiopia generally referred to the areas east of the Red Sea. Now we're gonna come back to that east of the Red Sea, often encompassing parts of modern day Yemen. Remember, we talked about that on the previous video. Go back to some of the previous videos. We talked about the Sabeans, we talked about the Phoenicians, and it all centers around the southern tip of Arabia. So, there's parts of modern day Yemen and southern Arabia. Yemen is on the southern tip of Arabia. Okay, so while Western Ethiopia primarily denoted the region around the Nile River Valley in present day Sudan, specifically the ancient kingdom of Kush, that's in south of Egypt, considered the primary Ethiopian territory in ancient historical records. So we're talking about Eastern and Western Ethiopia, or whatever case may be. And it's less when we talk about Eastern Ethiopia, it's getting less into the India aspect of it, and that Red Sea is becoming a real important thing. Okay, it says still Google AI. The Red Sea acted as a dividing line between eastern and western Ethiopia in ancient geographic perception. So the Red Sea is that dividing line between wherever eastern Ethiopia ends, which it's been stated in previous videos that it ends on um, in India or on the coast of India or whatever. It goes from the coast of India to the Pillars of Hercules, as it's been stated on previous videos. But the dividing line for Ethiopia, as it's being said here, is the Red Sea. So in previous videos, we've already stated that Erythraean Sea, the Indian Ocean and Persian Gulf was where the Phoenicians are said to be from. Herodotus says that they're from the Red Sea. We said the Phoenicians called themselves Ethiopians. So we linked all that in. The Habesha tribes on both sides of the Red Sea are from the southern tip of Arabia. Though they may reside in Africa, they're on the southern tip. They're from the southern tip of Arabia or whatever. We also said on previous videos within the book Celestial Ship of the North, we talked about how the word Habesha or whatever case may be, that's a reference to the Great Mother. That's a reference to the ancient deity Typhon, which we're going to get into a little bit more in this. So Okay, so we went into that. So Eastern and Western Ethiopia are divided by the Red Sea. So from so from the Pillars of Hercules to the shores of India. That's what we're dealing with. Okay, so as the Aksumite, still in Google AI, as the Aksumite kingdom rose, Aksum, a very prominent kingdom or whatever case may be. So rose to prominence. The term Ethiopia became more closely associated with the highlands of modern Ethiopia, located west of the Red Sea, effectively making this region the Western Ethiopia in later historical context. So when they talk about Ethiopia in more recent ancient history, ancient to us, more recent ancient history, they're talking about the kingdom of Aksum and everything like that. More getting more into your modern day area of Ethiopia and Eritrea and everything like that, or whatever. Catch me. When we talk about Eastern and Western Ethiopia, we're pretty much talking about an empire more so. You see what I'm saying? Which encompasses several civilizations. Because remember when we said on the previous video, when we refer to Ethiopians, we talking about Egyptians, we talking about Nubians, we talking about Arabians, we talking about Phoenicians, we talking about Dravidians, we talking about Pelagians. You see what I'm saying? It's a gang of people we talking about. We might even be talking about Celts. I've heard people talk about the old Celts or whatever. We know that the original Celts were black, because we can look at the migration patterns of the Twa and everything in Europe 30, 40, 50,000 years ago. So we know the original ones were black, but it's talks, I've heard in some literature they may be equated with Ethiopians, but neither here nor there. That kind of sets the stage for kind of what we're going to get into. So let's keep going. Let's go into the etymology of the word. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of these places or whatever, we might not have the luxury of doing an archaeological dig, or somebody might not have wrote a book on it. So maybe we go into the grammar of it. You see the etymology of the words and stuff like that. Okay, so this is from etymonline.com, right? We doing our light lifting with the internet. You know what I'm saying? We're doing our light lifting, you know what I mean, with these little websites, and then we're gonna go into the hard body bibliography. Okay, the often assumed etymology of the word Ethiopian, from Latin Ethiops, Ethiopia meaning Ethiopian Negro. Like I said, this was a racial distinction at one time. Let's see, the etymology of the word Ethiopian, from Latin Ethiops, from Greek Aethiops, long supposed in popular etymology to be from Ethene, to burn, or ops, face, from pro prosopon. Okay, compare Aethiops, fiery looking, later sunburned. Okay, so yeah, so with that you get that the meaning of burnt faces. You see what I'm saying? That's the traditional meaning when we get into the etymology of the word Ethiopian. We get into the term burnt faces and everything like that. But like how we said, when we talked about the Greeks, we're subsisting off the records of the most recent people to record records in ancient history or what have you. So a lot of the more accurate stuff we're gonna get from, let's say, Phoenician sources or Pelagian sources when we get a little bit deeper into this. So okay, so I'm gonna get back into this book, Ophioliotria. You see what I'm saying? An account of the rites and mysteries connected with the origin, rise, and development of serpent worship. All right, as we know, we talked about before, according to Jeremiah, ancient Egypt, light of the world, there are four phases. It's very difficult to understand Egypt without understanding the four phases of development that Egypt went through, namely the Sabean phase, the lunar phase, the solar lunar phase, and the latter phase, which being the solar phase and everything like that. All this Ophioliotra and everything like that ties into the Sabean phase, or whatever case may be. That's when you have the oldest religion on the planet, which is serpent worship, which is spread globally. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so we're gonna get into page 3. All right. Um, page 3 of Ophioliotra. Okay. Sanchoniathon makes mention of a history which he once wrote upon the worship of the serpent. The title of this work, according to Eusebius, was Ethiopian or Ethiopia. Another treatise upon the same subject was written by Pherecydes Tyrus, which was probably a copy of the former, for he is said to have composed it from some previous accounts of the Phoenicians. The title of his book was Theology of Ophion. Now that's gonna come back, that word Ophion. We're gonna get that's gonna be very significant in this video. Okay, styled Ophenius. You see what I'm saying? And his worshippers were called Ophiadae. Thoth and Athoth were certainly titles of the deity in the Gentile world, and the book of Sanchonia Thorn might very possibly have been from hence named Ethiopian, or more truly Ethiopian. But from the subject upon which it was written, as well as from the treatise of Pherecydes, we have reason to think that Ethiopian was a mistake, right? Peep game for Ophion. Ophion. Remember I said Ophion is going to come back and hit us. Okay, Ophion, a title which more immediate related to the worship of which the writer treated, right? Ath was a sacred title, as we have shown. Ath, as in Athens, as in Athena, as in Anath. You see what I'm saying? Um, okay. As we have shown, and we imagine that this dissertation did not barely relate to the Serpentine deity. Okay, Ath was a Serpentine deity. The Ath, as far as the Phoenicians is concerned and the Egyptians concerned, that turns into Neith, and that's what Athens is named after. So you're seeing the same thing. Okay, let's see. Mm, did not barely relate to Ath was a sacred title, was as we have shown, and we imagine that the dissertation did not barely relate to the Serpentine deity, but contained accounts of his votiaries, the Ophite, the principal of which were the sons of Chus. The worship of the serpent began amongst them, and they were from thence denominated Ethiopians, right? And Ethiopians, which the Greeks rendered Ethiopies. They did not receive this name from their complexion. They didn't get this name because there was burnt faces. You see what I'm saying? So we just debunked the first etymology that we just ran into. This guy's debunking it. He said that their complexion ain't had nothing to do with it, as has sometimes been surmised for the branch of foot and the Lahim were probably of a deeper dye. So it was darker people than them. So they wouldn't have called them burnt because they was darker people than them. Okay, but they were most likely so called from Ath Opi and Ath Opis, the god which they worshiped. This may be shown from Pliny. He says that the country Ethiopia, and consequently the people, so we talking about the country Ethiopia, from the Indian Ocean, from the shores of India to the Pillars of Hercules. We talking about that whole swath of land, because that's eastern and western Ethiopia, right? Okay, so had the name of Ethiop from a personage who was a deity. A Ethiop Volcanae Filio. The East Ethiopians brought these rites into Greece and called the island where they first established them Eliopas, Silis Serpentis Insula. It was the same as Uribe, a name of the like purport, in which island was a region from Ethiopium. Ubre is probably Ob Ea, and signifies the Serpent Island. The same worship prevailed among the Hyperboreans, as we may judge from the name of the sacred woman who used to come annually to Delos. They were the priestess of Tauric goddesses. The Hercules was esteemed the chief of the gods, the same as Kronos, and was said to have produced the mundane egg. So when we get into the mundane egg, that's the Orphic story, the Pelagian story, which we're going to read in just a second. He was represented in the Orphic theology under the mixed symbol of a lion and a serpent, sometimes of a serpent only. Okay, so the relevance of what we just read from that, it's basically stating that Ethiopian had nothing to do with their complexion. Though it's a racial distinction, it had nothing to do with their complexion as people because there were darker people than them or whatever case may be. The word, and like I said, when you're dealing with the information coming from the Greeks, that's the youngest group of people in the ancient world. So you have to keep digging. So a lot of this stuff, when we referring to Sanchoniathon, that's a person who wrote the Phoenician stories and stuff about the Phoenician mythology and stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? And he was saying that the Greeks didn't completely understand the piece of the Phoenician mythology that they took, or whatever case may be. So he was writing some of that, and you can see the difference, and you can see the knockoff versus the original. So to get the meaning of some of these words, we have to go deeper, than just the Greek thing. Okay, so like it was said on previous videos, okay, words like ad like the Adites, the lost tribes of Arabians we talked about in the previous videos, the Adites, the Thamudites, all those groups of people or whatever, like your Atlantis of the Sands, your Iram of the Pillars, all these lost cities that were attributed to be built by giants. And we're gonna get into the whole giant thing in a minute. Okay. Words, names like Ad, as in the Adites of Arabia, turn into Ab, excuse me, Ab, Ap, like a Apopis, a Pep, Ab, Op, Off, like Ophion. We also see how words like Ethiopian or Ethiopian, Ath, as in Athena, Athens, Anath, Neith, Ath, a serpent deity, breaks down at, Ethiopian, Ophion, Ophite, Ophidian. Ophion was king of the Titans prior to Kronos in mythology. So that's something that we're gonna get into. We're gonna get into the story of Ophion and Erudimi. That's who Kronos overthrew um, um, to attain his rulership amongst the Titans and everything like that. Ophion is often associated with Uranus. You see what I'm saying? When we get into Ophion, that's Pelagian mythology. Because remember, we always make the distinction between the Hellenistic Greeks, that's 700 BC, when Hesiod writes the Theogony to the death of Alexander the Great, 323 BC, versus the people who founded Athens, Attica, and most of the significant cities in Greece being the Pelagians. Those are some of the people that the Hellenistic Greeks took this mythology from, along with your Phoenicians. The Phoenicians, another group of Ethiopians, as we've already said. So yeah. So when we get into the story of Ophion. Ophion is sometimes associated with Uranus, fame, and Oceanus. Remember, we said Oceanus is associated with the Nile River. Now, in some of the stories, you're going to hear Oceanus being the father and Nilus being the son, associated with the Nile River. In some stories, you're going to hear just Oceanus, which is a Titan, being associated with the Nile River. Oceanus is a Titan version of Poseidon or Neptune. And Ath, Neith, what they named Athena or Athens after, because remember the Pelagians dealt with Ath and everything like that, and they founded Athens, so it would make sense. And Ophion, or the who would be equivalent to Oceanus or what have you, were a big deal to the seafaring Phoenicians, Ethiopians. So yeah. Okay, so we're still getting into who Ophion is. You see what I'm saying? Ath, we gonna equate Ath with with the mother deity, or some iteration of the mother deity or what have you, whether it be Neith, whether it be Anath or what have you or whatever. But we see how that's a common thing in various cultures that consider themselves Ethiopian. We have some iteration of the mother deity. But let's get into this Pelagian creation story. And again, we separate the Pelagians from the Hellenistic Greeks. So this is the Pelagian creation story. This is from, Wikipedia. We got to use the internet to fill in all these little corners, and then we're going to get into some hardcore bibliography, right? Okay, so the Pelagian creation story. Graves imaginatively reconstructed Pelagian creation myth features a supreme creatrix, Euronymie, the goddess of all things, who rises naked from chaos to part sea from sky, so that she can dance upon the waves, catching the north wind at her back and rubbing it between her hands. She warms the Numa, and spontaneously generates the serpent Ophion. She spontaneously generates the serpent Ophion, okay, who mates with her. Sound familiar? Sound like what we talked about in the previous videos about Taweret or Typhon and Satuk. You see what I'm saying? Same thing. In the form of a dove, right? Upon the waves, she lays the cosmic egg and bids Ophion to incubate it by coiling 7 times, that number 7 again, around upon it splits in two and hatches all things that exist: sun, moon, planets, stars, the earth with its mountains and rivers, its trees, herbs, and living creatures. In the soil of Acadia, the Pelagians spring up from Ophion's teeth, scattered under the heels of Uranus, who knocked the serpent from her home on Mount Olympus for his boast of having created all things. Uranus, whose name means wide wandering, sets male and female, Titans from each wandering planet, Thea and Hyperion for the sun, Phoebe and Atlas for the moon, Metis and Coes for Mercury, Thetis and Oceanus for Venus, Dion and Creus for Mars, Themis and Eurymedon for Jupiter, and Rhea and Cronus for Saturn. And that's coming out of Wikipedia. All right, I'm going to be coming in using this Celestial Ship of the North. Reading out of that real quick. We're going to go to page 195. Uh, Okay, so we're gonna get into some of this. I'm gonna go back into Celestial Ship of the North. Now, this is what we're about to get into. It's gonna heavily correlate with a lot of the stuff we've been talking about these pole shifts and stuff like that. When we get into this Sabean phase, this is considered polar mythology, what they call polar mythology. Um, when you get into all that story about the world trees and mountains and things of that nature, giant mountains at the navel of the earth and everything like that. That's kind of what the Sabean phase, this Typhonian stuff kind of touches on, or whatever the case may be. But we're gonna make our point. We're gonna get into this about the Titans real quick. Okay, so it's let's see here. We're gonna get into page 195 from Celestial Ship of the North. Tradition relating to the poles is of immeasurable astrological value. Axieros was the distinctive appellation given by the ancients to the two poles, which were conjointly the cherubim, cherubim, Kabirim, excuse me. These were names suggesting the principles of generation and most powerful gods, right? So when we get into this, this is where the term Gibborim come from in the Bible. You see what I'm saying? These are the giants and stuff like that, the mighty men and all that stuff like that that's mentioned in the Bible or whatever. This is where that term actually comes from. It comes from polar mythology. When we get back into this Sabean phase or whatever. Now I'm gonna start from page 197 on Celestial Ship of the North. And we're gonna ride out for a little minute. So we're gonna get into these uh, Caribbean. You see what I'm saying? Astronomically, the poles are the heavenly measures. Their name, Caribbean, means measure of the stars, the lights. In the word beginning with a C instead of a K, Cab means a measure in Irum or Urum, like Urim and Thummim sound like, means the heavens. They were always known as great, beneficent, and powerful gods, and under so many different names that much confusion has arisen concerning them. An esoteric understanding brings light and a perfect explanation which straightens out many of the riddles not easily divulged to those without intuitive or perceptive knowledge. Esoterically, the Kabiri Dioscuri were the two poles later called by the Greeks Castor and Pollux. Those are also the twins that Gemini is associated with. The two brilliant stars, which are given to represent the zodiac sign Gemini, which has been called the two pillars of heaven. The Kabiri Titans were the seven great gods, cosmically and were the seven great gods cosmically and astronomically. Okay, so we get into that number seven. That we see that number seven again, or whatever case may be. As Titans, they were called children of the sun because of their being connected with At. Al-As, the divine sun, and with Tit, the deluge. The Titans were called Atlantes, Atlantes, right? So the Titans are associated with Atlantis. That's what they called according to this. This is still talking about this Kabiri, all right? Diodorus ascribes the invention of fire and the art of manufacturing iron to the Kabiri Titans, and Pausanias proves the original Kabiri deity was Prometheus. Prometheus is where they get Lucifer from. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to the mortals and stuff like that. And in the Bible, he makes it as the biblical character Lucifer in the Judeo-Christian mythos, but this is the original form of him, the Promethean, the Titan Prometheus, right? The Kabiri were not only cosmically generators of the seasons, but also as presiding gods were great volcanic energies. I know in the previous video we talked about the Western Horizon and stuff like that. We talk about how the obliquity in the obliquity in the angle of tilt of the earth determines our seasons. No coincidence that these Kabiri are associated with the poles, and they're also associated with the determining of the seasons. No coincidence. All right. They brought light into the world, symbolized in Prometheus, who had also brought light into the world and had endowed humanity with reason and intellect. The name Kabirios means the powerful through fire, and wherever cult of Kabiri was recognized, it was always connected with fire. They built their temples in the most volcanic regions. Possibly in this, we find a key to the Christians having made of them infernal gods. So that's why they said the fallen so-called are infernal gods or whatever. Because from a Judeo-Christian perspective, they're talking about the Gibor men. They're talking about Nephilim, Gibor, all this stuff like this. All right. But this is why they dealing with such their gods or titans and all that stuff like that, because this is polar so-called mythology, right? So sacred was their temple at Memphis that only priests were allowed to enter. For many long ages, the Kabiri lived in the memory of the nations as the benefactors of man, and whether called planetary spirits, angels, or messengers, taught the mysteries of the art of architecture. Osiris Isis, as the great Kabir of Egypt, was said to have revealed wheat by producing it. The origin of the Semitic Kabirum, the powerful and mighty, the great, has disappeared in the shadowy mists of time. The word Gibor comes from Kabiri or Kabiri. They interchanging the K and the C, and means the ancient fire worshippers of Parsis. As Gabir, it has remained as an appellation of the Zoroastrians in Persia. In the Sanchoniathon mysteries, the generic name of the Kabiri was the Holy Fires. They were the founders of the 7 localities of the island of Samothrace, sacred to Vulcan, or in Egypt, Ptah, what have you, Hephaestus, the Kabir, born of the holy Lemnos, whom Pindir describes as Adamas, was a type of primitive man born from the bosom of earth physically, and from the divine fire of progenitors spiritually. Hence derives the 7 atoms, who were preeminently the 7 stars of fires of the constellation of the Great Bear. So we're going back into the Great Bear as a pole star. According to the Babylonian accounts, the first race to fall into generation was Adamai, the dark race, compromising those ancient primitive peoples whose records were ever written in the heavens. In inner Africa, the name of the most ancient great mother, was Hebma, whose children were the Kamara or Kabiri. Kam means black, the black race. The Kabiri of Samothrace were said to drink at 2 fountains, Leith, Oblivion, and Nomasnet, memory. They, like the most ancient deities of the Egyptian temples, were the cosmic gods, the great polar gods, who were the um, presiding powers of the sidereal 26,000-year cycle. I think we talked about that, and agents of the upward progress of the race. The Grecian temples, their rites became phallic and their worship indecent. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they are called the lords of the 4 cardinal points, the genii that guard the 4 corners of the sarcophagus belonging to the 7 spirits. All right. The seven stars of the constellation of the Great Bear. In the Kabbalah, they are the watchers of heaven. In the Book of Enoch, it talks about the watchers and everything like that, the watchers of the fallen and all that stuff like that, or whatever case may be. Because fallen in the sense that the pole star, like we talked on previous videos or whatever, the pole star drifts and it no longer it changes to a new pole star. So the previous one is no longer accurate as far as measuring time. So that's the fallen as far as this is concerned. But let's keep going. In the Kabbalah, they are the watchers in heaven, counselors of the Most High. Noah was called a great Kabir. He is either a myth or a legendary hero evolved from the Kabiri of Samothrace, of Titanic tradition. We just talked about the Titans. Remember, we talking about how Greek mythology really goes back into Ethiopian mythology, and and when you start digging back into the Ethiopian stuff, such as the Adites of Arabia and stuff like that, you get tales of giants. Well, no coincidence, their gods were giants, and giants tie into polar mythology. When we talk about the pole star, the North and South Pole, and all that. Okay, so Cain, represented by the planet Mars, is god of generation. Tubal Cain was a Kabir, an instructor. He was Volcane, greatest of all the of a later period, and in Egypt termed the greatest of gods. The deity of Israel was called the Great Kabir. The Hebrew word kab means to roll around. The hab in Egypt is to give birth to. Ari, remember we said Aryan, the term Aryan descends from the prefix Ari. You see what I'm saying? That's where that comes from. We said Aryans or Cushites in their origin. Ari or Aru in Egyptian are the watchers, the companions, the keepers, the companions of the Big Dipper star. It alludes to the seven stars of the Big Dipper, and it's going back into this Typhonian phase or whatever. It's denoting stellar worship. The Kabari were the seven that gave birth to it and made the first circle of time. The watchers, the grouping of the original seven made by the clustering together of these stars, was called cabbing. The Kabbalah itself means the doctrine of the stars, their revolutions, repetitions, hidden wisdom, and sacred powers relating to the cycles of time. The Jews claim that the Kabbalah was taught by God to a select company of angels in paradise, while an astronomical myth tells us that paradise, or the Garden of Eden, was formed by the seven great stars that circle the pole, called the Kabiri or Kabari. Kabari, as in Aryan. That's how we get that. Okay. Occult science proves that the founders of all root races have been connected to the North Pole, right? Then then we talk about in the Temple of Dendera, Taweret, where Taweret sits, which is a birthing deity. She sits on the Draco star constellation. They call it the Thigh. They say that's where they come from. Okay, gods, religions, beliefs, myths have all come from there. No wonder we find it alluded to as the cradle of man. For when the pole star energizes the Earth's axis, humanity receives an upward urge of spiritual rebirth. The ancient topography of the nature of the Arctic and Antarctic regions, of which the ancients had clear understanding, is unquestionably accurate. If we hold at present only to the astronomical and geographical significance, it may be found that the ancients knew the topography and nature of the Arctic and Antarctic regions better than any of our modern astronomers. Early early astronomers divide the heavens into three great divisions. The point called the mountain, denominated the highest, was the middle of the first division, which also seemed to remain above the horizon and stationary. Because when we get into this mythos of the world tree within the Mayan cosmology, within the Norse cosmology, it's divided like this. Okay, the highest region is for the gods, the roots of the trees, the underworld, the middle parts where people live, things like that. It was made the seat of the empire, whose monarch from his throne could behold the whole world and every nation, night or day. That's what they say about Odin, ain't it? Okay, this was the great judgment seat from which even unto this day a certain period in periods in world changes proceeds the powerful justice ray of a balancing manifestation. Ragnarok and all that, they measuring the cycles. You see what I'm saying? Because when these catastrophes or these judgment times hit in their mythology, they're really talking about a time when some sort of the poles are flipping or something like that, and you reach some sort of catastrophe on the planet or whatever. Let's see here. We finishing up. Henry Melville in the Veritas very fittingly speaks of the pole star as the rock of ages. Trust ye in the Lord forever, for the Lord Jehovah is the rock of ages. Isaiah, this polar star is the rock, or Mount Olympus of the Latins, which was so high that no bird could fly to the top, nor were clouds ever seen on its summit. The polar star is the Mount Meru of the Buddhists. Remember, we're talking about, once again, this mountain at the center of the earth, or whatever case may be. The earthly center would be, let's say, like the mountains of the moon. The heavenly center would be your pole star. Okay. And the Mount Zion of the Hebrews. Trust that they that trust in the Lord shall be as Mount Zion, which cannot be removed, but abideth forever. The circle of perpetual aspiration, what they call it. Stars that never set. You see what I'm saying? The North Pole. You dig? Okay. Psalms. Let's see. David says, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." From our world, nothing can appear higher than the pole star, which is the pivot or point of axis on which the earth performs its diurnal and annular motion. David exclaims, "Thus said the Lord, the heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye build unto me, and where is the place of my rest?" Cephas. Remember Jesus tell Peter, you know what I'm saying, "I'm gonna build my church on you," and all this stuff like that in the Bible. Okay, Cephas or Cepheus means rock. Cephas is seated in the highest heaven, and he has Mount Olympus, or the pole star, for his footstool. Celestial astrology and astronomy are spoken of as lost sciences, and we are told that until the position of the dark planet is known, astrology cannot become an exact science, yet it can and will again be raised to its former sublimity. Okay, and the last little piece, the North Pole of the heavens was represented as a mountain, and the South Pole was represented as the pit. So this mythology, this polar mythology, is how you get the ideas of heaven and hell. Heaven and hell ain't even that's not a real thing. It's metaphorical at best, but what they're talking about is the North and South Pole. Okay, last little piece. This is gonna be page 204 out of Celestial Ship of the North. All right, so the Kabari have been said to be one, two, three, four, and seven in number. One Kabir represented a great or mighty power in nature. Venus was called a great Kabir when in Siente and typified the first mother whose seven children as stars were the Kabiri. The two Kabiri were typified as the two poles of heaven. The Kabiri Dioscuri, terrestrially Jupiter, father of God of the gods, and Bacchus, god of wine, personifies the poles. 3 and 4 Kabiri are found in the Grecian phallic worship. These numbers represented the male and female principle. The four were also the genii or spirits of the four corners of the cardinal points belonging to the seven stars of the constellation of Great Bear. There are 4 Kabari who were called the Sanchoniathon, the sons of Sindik. If we identify Sindik as Noah as a just man of the scriptures, and with Melchizedek, priest of the Most High God, after his own order, both must have been the children of justice and identified, as was Sut, the star god, with Saturn, who became the planet of justice. The Kabiri were called Axioros, Axiokeros, Axiokersa, and Cadmos and Cadmilos, the latter being Hermes the Great of the sacred writings. They represented modes of force, and in their names should be noticed the introduction and transportation of letters. The letter A has been from most ancient times connected with the parent sun, while the letter X seems to relate to the cardinal cross of the fixed stars, and S to the serpent power. The Greek word for the ancient wisdom of the serpent is Sophia. Sophia can be found in Gnostic Christianity. Sophia ties into the Holy Ghost. It ties into the Spirit of the Lord and all that, moving across the face of the waters and stuff like that, because the dove that you have in Christianity, it comes out of the whole Typhonian tradition tens of thousands of years prior. Okay, so note the presence of the O, I, A, and S in Sophia, and similarly in the names Kaberi. Originally, Letters were symbols of heavenly power or modes of force. The Kabiri were said to have invented the letters of the alphabet in the language of the gods. They taught mankind architecture, law, legislation, and different kinds of magic and the use of medicinal plants. The names Kabiri, Cadmus, Noah, Hermes, Orpheus, Asclepius, etc. were all generic names. The Kaberi Titans are identical with all the rulers and instructors of the primeval races, which are referred to as the gods and kings of the divine dynasty. So let's read that one more time. Kaberi Titans are identified with all the rulers and instructors of the primeval races, which are referred to as the gods and kings of the divine dynasties. Okay, so we got a little bit into the Titans because a lot of times, I know in Greek mythology, and we've been kind of, writing off Greek mythology, as European or what have you, but in reality, that's, you know, very old Ethiopian mythology and stuff like that, and they even get into, let's say, the story of Titans. Okay, um, one Titan in particular, Ophion, that we just talked about, or Uranus. You see what I'm saying? Which was who Cronus in mythology overthrew to gain leadership of the Titans. Okay, Ophion's role in the Pelagian creation story, like we read before, sounds very similar to Soot in the Sabean phase of Egyptian culture, like we talked about in the beginning of this. Okay, the Pelagians, as the son and consort of his mother. You see what I'm saying? Rendering Ophion in Arunami the Pelagian version of Sutnub in Tawut or Typhon, right? So let's kind of get into that a little bit. Let's see here. We said like we said on previous videos, all of these civilizations as a collective, they all considered themselves Ethiopian, and they all had some sort of variation of this mother-child worship. So we're gonna get into page 5 of Celestial Ship of the North, right? The abyss in Egypt is a name of the north, and the original mother of this abyss, which was space, was called Typhon. Right, that's a Greek word, but we know what they're talking about, right? Tower red in Egypt, however, the mother of beginnings, the mother of the field of heaven, the mother of revolutions, time cycles. I think another name is Zodiacus. You know what I'm saying? That was another name she was called, as well as the mother of gods and men. She was later made goddess of the constellation of the Great Bear. The mother goddess and her first son was called Soot, the dog star in the south. It is here the mythological allegory born amongst the stars that we find the origin of the Immaculate Conception. The mother was called the Old Woman because she was the first of all creation and the world had been made for her. From the early beginning, developed so-called Typhonian religion, which with its types is the oldest of all. So if these people call themselves, so we just talked about earlier in the video about the whole thing about Ethiopian meaning burnt faces. Um, that's not necessarily true. But when we correlate Ethiopian with this mother child worship as Ophion, you see what I'm saying? This mother child worship or whatever case may be. Remember we said in previous video, Satuk is the first male deity of all time. So he's the child of his mother and everything like that. And this Sabean worship deals with the whole mother child concept, the great mother and everything. All these collectives, all these civilizations individually have some remnant of the mother child mythos and everything like that. We just read one remnant of it, the Pelagian story with Ophion and his mother and Arudami or what have you. In this story about Ophion, Ophion's a snake. You see what I'm saying? No coincidence. We just read the story about Satuk. As we get into it, another appellation or iteration of Satuk would be Apophis. He's a snake. You see what I'm saying? So we still in the same ballpark. Okay, so Soot, son of Typhon, was the name given to the first male ever recognized or known, and through his manifestations were many. His beginning was as Soot, the dog star, as we know it in the South. He ended by becoming the Alpha and Omega of the book of Revelations. Al Shaddai, Adonis, Baal, and others were all personifications of this early son of the first mother and originally belonged to her cult, which is the same as that of the Church of Rome today, the worship of the mother and child. So basically, when we talk about Ethiopia, that whole name ties back into this Typhonian worship, the worship of the mother and child. So so I'm gonna put an interesting spin on this before we close this video. Y'all sat down with me to the end of this video, so you can y'all can absorb the punchline on this. Okay, the punchline of this whole video is okay when we deal with the Ethiopian thing or whatever. They're not talking about they're not talking about their complexion. They're talking about a deity that they worship. They're named after a deity. When you start breaking open this thing, they're named after a deity named Ophion. Ophion, like how we talked about with Satuk in Egyptian mythology, we said Satuk is the first male deity of all time, and all other deities, period, take on his attributes and everything like that. Later on in Egyptian history, after the Osirian cult comes in or whatever, you have a depiction of Satuk, a different Satuk, which becomes the associated with Satan or the devil or whatever case may be. But the original Satuk is associated with Sirius and the dog star or what have you. Okay, so this original Satuk, okay, in Pelagian mythology, this Ophion would be in line with that original Satuk because he's the child of the mother, right? So when we get Ophion, if we follow that trail, Ophion is in line with Uranus, you see what I'm saying, which is Uranus in ancient Greek. Now, don't get me wrong, that don't take away his whole thing is Oceanus and Poseidon. That's in there as well. But we want to focus on this Uranus thing. Okay, so Ophion is basically Uranus, right? Who is Uranus in Sumerian mythology? In Sumerian mythology, Uranus is Anu, right? Anu, the heavenly one. So basically, if you read the mythology and the stories about Ophion, Ophion is the person who ruled, according to the mythology. I'm only going by the stories. He's the person who ruled the planet. You see what I'm saying? Prior to Kronos. Kronos, if we dip into Sumerian mythology, Kronos would be associated with Ea or Enki. You see what I'm saying? So I'm not gonna put all the sauce on it for you, but I'm just letting you know Ophion, where the name Ethiopian or Ophion actually deals with is actually, if you flip it to the Sumerian thing, that's Anu, the heavenly one. You see what I'm saying? So you can put whatever kind of, I know y'all into the Anunnaki and all that stuff like that, but basically Ethiopians are associated with the Sumerian god Anu, straight like that. So that's just want to kind of lay that down. Um, I know I just don't hear a lot of people talk about it. So that would be the first Satuk. He's associated with Apophis. He's associated with Ophion, which is also a snake. So it's still in line with this serpent thing, but at the same time, I know Sumerian mythology, so called, is a little bit cleaner for some than certain other mythologies or whatever case may be. But according to this, what we talked about, tracing the language, tracing the origin of words and everything like that, certain other things or whatever, yeah, that's what they're talking about. So appreciate y'all for rocking with me. I know it's been about 45 minutes or whatever. So y'all like these little pieces we've been doing. Y'all like and subscribe. Appreciate the love. Peace and blessings.